Welcome to another wonderful Susannah Calloway audiobook. We are excited to have you with us. Before we begin the story, please like and subscribe to our channel and share it with friends. This allows us to continue adding free clean Western romance audiobooks for you to enjoy. The following title is copyrighted by Susannah Calloway, Western romance author. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and enjoy the story. The Bride Who Was Rescued. Chapter 1. It was a cool Georgia night in Madison, and Rebecca Davis bustled about the kitchen after dinner had been served and the table cleared away. Taking care of the meals had become one of her chores ever since the stiffness had begun to creep into her mother's hands. Sometimes they stiffened so much they looked more like mangled tree roots than fingers, and the pain was terrible. The house was quiet, save for the sound of the dishes clanking together as Rebecca washed them. She knew where her parents would be, seated in their respective rockers on the front stoop, her father with his pipe in hand and her mother dozing for a few minutes before they retired for the evening. Everything was always the same. Nothing ever changed, and Rebecca sorely wished it would. Wiping her glistening brow with the back of a damp hand, Rebecca considered her life up until that point. Nothing had changed much in the last years, even her thoughts had become monotonous, keeping her company in the hollow of the small house. Her father had built this home with his own hands 30 years before. Its structure had not varied, except for the addition of a room for Rebecca once she became of age. Life was hard in Madison, at least for her parents. Her father, though a man who loved the Bible as much as anyone in their God-fearing town, had a penchant for gambling that rivaled a man with twice his income to spend. Every year the crops would come in, they'd get what pittance the market was offering, and then Milton Davis would buy seed for the next harvest. Afterward, he'd hit the local saloon to celebrate. The next day he'd lament his foolishness, but he'd do it all again the next harvest. His hard work deserved to be recompensed, he'd say. It was unfortunate that the same didn't apply to Rebecca. She was 8 years old when her parents took her out of the small church school to work the farm. Her mother's pains had started 2 years earlier, and being a small farm, her father couldn't afford to hire a hand, leaving Rebecca as his only choice. Her parents had put it off as long as they could, allowing Rebecca to learn to read and write before her schooling days came to an abrupt end. Unlike many who whined about going to school and who would have rejoiced at the thought of leaving, Rebecca dearly loved the instruction she gained at the feet of Miss Talbot, the schoolmistress. The woman had fed Rebecca's fondness for stories, especially those of far-off places. When her schooling ended, Rebecca had started making up her own tales to occupy her inquisitive mind. Whenever she got the chance, she combed the newspaper for some interesting tale. 11 years later, the stories were no longer enough. She wanted more than the mundane life she'd been living. Her life held no excitement outside of the occasional visit of a wolf to the henhouse. There had to be more out there, but where? How could she find it? How could she get there? Rebecca. Yes, Mama. Bring the sweet tea when you're comin'. All right. I'll take a bit, too. Yes, Daddy. Rebecca finished up the washing, the thought of her life once again pushed behind the reality of her situation. All she could hope for was what she had, at least for now. More days of work in the fields and more nights of cooking, washing dishes, serving sweet tea and sitting on the porch until she grew too tired to keep her eyes open. All the while, she wondered if the plans for her life were really ordered by God, and if they were, was this all he had for her? Here's your tea. She handed the first cup to her father and then the other to her mother, before going back for one of her own. She took a seat in her rocker, the one with the wobbly armrest, and took a sip. The night was cool and even when combined with the hot tea, it made her shiver. Winter's comin', she commented, rocking slightly. No doubtin' it. My bones are atchin'. Do you want another blanket, Mama? No, darlin', I'll be just fine. We'll be goin' in shortly, Mildred replied, glancing over in her husband's direction. Her father cleared his throat. Rebecca, tomorrow I want you to start fixin' the place up nice, and thinkin' about makin' something real special for Wednesday's dinner. We're havin' a guest at our table, and I want to show them the best we can offer. Of course, Daddy. Who's comin'? Owen Tucker. That banker fella? Why's he comin'? Rebecca didn't miss the exchange of looks between her parents, nor the way their eyes said what their mouths didn't. Is somethin' the matter? Why was a banker coming to their home? Was her father in trouble? There'd be no reason for such an important man to come to their humble little homestead. Not at all, her father replied with a small laugh that belied his anxiety. Something was wrong, he just wasn't saying. Daddy, she prodded, wanting the truth. Mr. Tucker's asked for your hand. He's comin' over tomorrow to call on ya. The word struck Rebecca like a slap. I don't want to marry Mr. Tucker, she replied, the sudden expression of her feelings a surprise to all on the porch. Don't be foolish, girl. Mr. Tucker's a wealthy man, there's few wealthier in this town, and he wants to marry ya. How many offers you think a girl like you is gonna get? Rebecca's deep emerald eyes fell at the admonishment. She should have been flattered that such a man would even look in her direction, yet it was the way he looked at her that gave her pause. It wasn't that long ago, maybe a year or so, that she'd first set eyes on Owen Tucker. Her mother was going through one of her bad days, and her father had asked her to accompany him into town to get supplies. The way Owen Tucker looked at her when she'd passed him in the street reminded her of the look she'd once seen on a hungry wolf, just before it tore apart the chicken he'd stolen from their coop. He's a perfect match for ya. I don't want to hear any more folly about not liking the man. You'll come to like him. Her father got to his feet. I'm turning in. Help me up, Milton, her mother asked, and immediately he looped an arm around her waist and gripped her hand with his other. I suggest you turn in early tonight. You've got lots to do to prepare for Mr. Tucker's visit on Wednesday, her mother instructed. Rebecca pressed her lips together. Don't forget that your cousin's tea party is tomorrow afternoon. I can't believe that silly girl's found herself a businessman for a husband. Well, she always was a lucky child, Mildred commented, somewhat sourly. Yes, she always was. Good night, Rebecca. Good night. Rebecca's eyes didn't linger on her parents as they went indoors, but they did linger on the clear navy sky speckled with dots of white light. She sighed, setting her tea on the ground at her feet and leaning back against the chair. Lord? Owen Tucker? I know I asked for something to happen in my life, but him? How can I marry such a man? There's something just not right about him. I don't know what, but I can feel it. She squeezed her eyes closed. If this is your will for me, send me a sign. Send me a sign so I'll know what to do. Please, Lord, I'm counting on you. Chapter 2. Visiting her cousin's house always made Rebecca feel uncomfortable. The Newtons were much better off than their cousins, and they never forgot to remind Rebecca of that fact. The only reason she ever visited was because her mother made her, though her cousins never accepted invitations to her house. They always had an excuse, some prior engagement that was more important than visiting their kin. Good evening, Aunt Miriam, Rebecca said politely, holding out a small cake she'd baked for the occasion. Rebecca, you're here. I'm so glad you could come. What a lovely gift. I always tell Cook that if she ever slipped up I'd know just who to hire, her aunt replied, ushering her in. Be a dear and take that to the kitchen for me. All of Prudence's guests are here, and I'd be a terrible host leaving them. Yes, ma'am. Rebecca walked quietly to the kitchen, admiring how large the house was compared to her own. The Newton home had a downstairs and an upstairs, with servants' quarters in the back near the kitchen. That was where the family's cook, Dolly, resided. Rebecca often felt she had more in common with the plump cook than she did the owners of the house. Hi, Dolly, she stated upon entering the kitchen. The older woman was hunched over a pan of fresh bread. Rebecca. How are you doin', love? She asked, rumbling from behind the counter to give the younger woman a hug. It's been ages since I last saw ya. How's your ma and pa? They're doin' just fine. I brought a cake for this evenin', Rebecca stated, resting the gift on the table. Wonderful. You've such a way in the kitchen. I'll be sure to hide a piece away for myself, Dolly mused. How've you been? Child, I don't worry about things, you know that. My life's always good as long as I've got breath in my lungs and a roof over my head. How can you be so happy all the time? What's the use in being sad? The question left Rebecca silent. Child, if we complained about every little thing that happened, what time would we have to see the good things? What if there aren't any? Pish. They're always good. As long as there be a God, there's good. Now, she said, giving Rebecca a quick kiss on the forehead and gently fluffing her voluminous black curls, you better be getting to the party. Don't want them finned in, ya hanging out in here. They are the best company in town, Dolly mused, and Rebecca giggled. I'll see you later. Try to have a good time. The Newton salon was alive with chatter. Women were seated in groups, talking animatedly about the events of their lives. Events Rebecca couldn't relate to. My husband's taking me on a trip to Spain, one woman commented. I envy you, Kathy. Mine's only ever taken me to London. You should have taken a ship to France. It's so fine in the summer, another added. Rebecca kept to herself on the couch, sipping her tea and nibbling on the odd sandwich. Would you listen to this? Quiet girls, Prudence ordered, calling everyone's attention to her. What is it? The article Margaret just showed me in the paper. It's an ad for one of those mail-order brides. Read it, Prudence. Let's all share in the joke. Listen, Prudence stated, settling herself upon her chair and clearing her throat. Young man seeks patient woman, with a desire for travel, and a will to a nice home. Not afraid to work with her hands to build a future. Strong faith in God, and an imagination to create what can't be seen. Respectfully. Thomas Beckett. Lawton City, Nebraska. The laughter that filled the room was surprising, at least to Rebecca, who had at first ignored her cousin's reading, but then had become intrigued by the content. Imagine a man putting an ad in the paper to find a wife. Prudence chortled. That's what parents are supposed to do. Make the right match. He could end up with anybody. He might be anybody, another woman commented. More like nobody, said another, causing the laughter to double. You don't know his circumstances. The words left Rebecca's mouth unsolicited, and suddenly the entire room was fixated on her. You have an opinion, Rebecca? Please share. Prudence's invitation seemed more like mocking, still Rebecca did have something to say, at least on this. I mean, you don't know why he put an ad for himself. His parents may be dead, or maybe they're too far away, and he's gotta do things himself. She chuckled. Besides, ain't it better for a man to wanna marry ya because he likes something about ya, and not because his mama and daddy told him to? They looked at her as if she had grown two heads. Rebecca couldn't understand why. All she'd said was that it was better to have a man marry you because he loved you, rather than because of an arrangement between the parents. Then it hit her. Prudence. In her sincerity, Rebecca had touched on the very circumstances she'd come to celebrate with her cousin, a marriage arranged by parents. Not that there's anything wrong with that, Rebecca added quickly, but the damage had already been done. You really are young to think that way, Prudence remarked. Happiness in marriage has nothing to do with who picks you or why. It's being chosen to be someone's wife, someone of note and importance. And you've done that, one of her friends piped in. I didn't mean anything. I was just giving my opinion, but I don't have much experience to draw on. Rebecca could feel the cold glares around her. Why was her tongue so quick to voice itself? No, you don't have any experience. Maybe it'd be better if you gave opinions on things you're knowledgeable about, like chickens and the right time to harvest corn. Rebecca ground her teeth to bite back the response that was dancing on the tip of her tongue. She'd lived with many such snide remarks, but today she didn't feel inclined to accept them in silence. Yes, well, I do know about those things, Rebecca said proudly, getting to her feet. I know about hard work, perseverance, and the success of accomplished goals that I'd done all by myself. I also know about making pies, feedin' my family, and doin' the right thing because it's right and not because it benefits me. I know who my real friends are, and I don't keep company with people just because they'll make me look better. And when I marry, I'll marry a man who loves me for who I am, because he wants me, not because he's gettin' something from the deal. I'll mean something to him. Love ain't about matching price tags. Real love is matching souls. She sucked in a jagged breath as her cousin glared at her from her seat. Now, I best be leavin'. I have chickens to tend. And she swirled from the room. That evening, Rebecca lied to her mother about her visit. She hated lying, but telling her parents what she'd said would have been worse. She always bore the truth alone when it came to the disdain from their kin. Her parents felt low enough as it was without Rebecca recounting the day's affairs and giving one more example of such poor treatment. The house was quiet when she sneaked from her room to get the newspaper from the table, where her father had left it. She could live with being nobody to her kin, but she couldn't live with marrying a man she didn't love, just because he'd make her respectable. She'd said the same in her cousin's parlor, and she knew in her heart that nothing but true love would do. If she couldn't marry for love, she wouldn't marry at all. Chapter 3. He was staring at her with those dark beady eyes. It made Rebecca's skin crawl to be sitting next to him, but her mother had insisted she take the place beside Owen. Dinner was a pot pie, with berry cobbler to follow and fresh sweet tea. Rebecca had done her best, but there wasn't much in the way of ingredients at the moment, leaving the family to make do the best they could with what they had. You have a wonderful table. Thank ya, Mr. Tucker, we do our best. Rebecca's the one who did all the cookin'. She's a right genius in the kitchen, her father said. Is that so? Rebecca could feel those black dots focus on her again, and she did her best to avoid making contact with them. It was nothin' really, she murmured. So modest. I bet you don't like taking credit for any of your fine accomplishments. Despite herself, Rebecca looked at him. I'm sorry, Mr. Tucker, but I think you might have me a bit confused. I don't have any fine accomplishments. I'm really nothin' special at all. Her father flashed her a scathing look. Of course, you are. Don't mind Rebecca, Owen, it's that delicate feminine modesty that all men want in their wives. Allows them to shine. Just the kind of thing I like in a woman. Pride is such an unattractive quality. A good wife should be modest. Know her place beside her husband, Owen replied. Rebecca stared at her plate, only glancing up to give her mother a pleading look. Surely, her mother couldn't want her to marry this man. Suddenly, she felt something snake against her thigh. She jumped up with a yelp. I'm sorry, Rebecca. My napkin slipped. Owen's words were apologetic, but the look in his eyes was not. Silly girl. You'd think somethin' had bit ya, her father said with a laugh. I thought it had, Daddy, she remarked, taking her seat once more and scooting a little further left. The more Rebecca's parents forced her to meet with Owen, the more she disliked him. With every visit, Owen showed more and more of himself, and all of it was bad. Everything from his slicked hair and dubious mustache, to the way he emphasized his words so perfectly. Not to mention the way his hands always found some way of touching her. Still, her parents thought him wonderful, the right choice for her, and he'd certainly done his best to promote the idea. Owen had brought her father a turkey and a ham. He'd bought new tableware for her mother as gift on her birthday, and he'd purchased Rebecca several fine dresses. It wasn't out of kindness, she knew, it was because he wanted his wife looking the part. She'd stuffed the dresses in a wardrobe and refused to wear them. Every time he came calling, he'd ask why she hadn't chosen to wear one of his dresses. Her answer was always the same: they were far too nice for such an occasion. I thought, if you'd both allow, Rebecca and I might take a walk after dinner, Owen suggested to her parents one evening. Alarm filled her chest. A walk? With him? Her mind immediately began to conjure up some excuse as to why that couldn't be, but before she'd had a chance to concoct one, her father answered. Why, that's a wonderful idea. Course it's fine by us. You two go and have a nice walk. Walking's good for the digestion, plus it's a pretty night. Rebecca? Owen asked, rising from the table with outstretched hand. She looked at it as if it would bite. Thank you, she forced herself to respond, taking the offered hand out of politeness, knowing her parents would be enraged if she insulted him by refusing it. Once outside, she'd quickly released it. "Mr. Tucker." "Owen." "Mr. Tucker, I really don't feel like a walk. Can't we just sit out here? I told your parents we'd be taking a walk. I'd be going against my word if we did otherwise." The grin that accompanied his words did nothing to dispel her unease. "Very well." She started walking, her head high and her pace brisk. The faster they got this over with, the better. "You walk very quickly," he commented. "It's good for a person," she replied, quickening her pace. "Fills the lungs with good fresh air." A low laugh came from behind her, and a moment later, her wrist was grabbed. "I'm in perfect health, and since you seem to be as well, I think we can slow down." His words sounded more like an edict than a suggestion. Rebecca would have had some rebuttal, but she was still reeling at the audacity of him grabbing her hand. She tried to yank her hand away, but he held it fast. "Mr. Tucker. It's Owen. You're going to be my wife, and I think you can call me by my first name. That's if I was to be your wife." "Nothing's been decided," she said, thinking of another option which she'd carefully hidden from everyone. "But it has. My father would have told me," she said indignantly. "Your father and I discussed it this evening before you brought out the meal. He was going to tell you later, but I think that now is as good a time as any." Her entire body went weak. Owen's smile widened as her hands slackened in his grip. "There we go. Much better. I think we need to get some things understood," he said, with a coldness she'd never heard before. "Some things? First, you will call me Owen, or a term of endearment that I deem fit. You will wear what I buy you. These simple dresses will not do for any wife of mine. It speaks ill of me, and I won't have it. You have tenacity, which I like, but I fear you may have just a bit too much. This will have to be corrected." "Corrected?" She gaped at him. "Please don't interrupt me when I'm speaking," Owen interjected, yanking on her arm. "I suggest you let go of me, or I'll call my father," Rebecca replied through gritted teeth. "Your father is reveling in this match. He is penniless, but his beautiful daughter has been chosen by one of the wealthiest men in town. I don't think he'll mind me speaking frankly with my bride-to-be. Do you?" She clenched her jaw, knowing he was right. "Now, we understand each other," he stated, and leaned in to kiss her forehead. "I must leave you now. I wouldn't want your parents thinking I was getting fresh. There will be plenty of time for that after we're married. I'll speak with your father about setting a date." Rebecca couldn't speak. Anger held her tongue behind her teeth as desperation gripped her chest. She could hardly wait to get to her room. She didn't bother to sit with her parents, but retired early. The moment she was hidden away behind the door of her room, she gathered some paper and the secret letter she'd received only days before. She'd been hesitant at first, but now the choice was clear. "Dear Thomas," she whispered as she wrote. "Send for me. I will come west and marry you." Chapter 4. Rebecca was even prettier than he'd imagined. When she had said her hair was dark, Thomas had expected something akin to a horse's mane, but he was entirely wrong. Rebecca's hair was thicker, clear, and bounced against her shoulders as they rode in the wagon, while tiny white flecks of snow settled on her head in a late winter flurry. Her skin was darker than he'd expected, but he guessed it was on account of the days she worked in the Georgia heat, not that the dark, rich hue detracted one iota from her beauty. Thomas wasn't sure he'd ever seen a woman as pretty as she was. Then again, it may have something to do with the way he felt about her. The day he decided to follow in Marshall's example and find himself a bride, Thomas Beckett hadn't been sure what he was in for. Yes, he wanted a wife, someone to build the homestead he'd been imagining for years, but he also wanted someone who could add to him and the plans he had. When he'd received Rebecca's letter amidst an assortment of others, he hadn't at first been particularly struck by the simple note. It was a pleasant enough introduction, but so were all the rest. It wasn't until Rebecca began to share more about herself, her circumstances, and the dreams she had, that she'd finally hooked him. She was a kindred heart miles away, and the longer they exchanged letters, the more he wanted her close, and the greater he felt the need to protect her. He may have jumped the gun on their courtship. 3 months hardly seemed long enough to gauge a person's entire character, but he'd learned enough about Rebecca in that time to know that he wasn't going to find a woman more perfectly suited for him. He'd prayed about it, and sought Marshall's and Grace's counsel. After all, she would be another mouth to feed on his boss's ranch and another person for possible employment. As his boss, it was really up to Marshall. Once Marshall and Grace gave their blessing and shared their confidence in his ability to care for a wife, Thomas had seen about getting Rebecca work. It was perfect. Grace needed help, and Rebecca would need work. He couldn't wait to tell her, but it was a surprise. He wanted her to see how well he could provide for her. He was going to make things fine for her. Oh, my. Thomas turned at Rebecca's exclamation and smiled. That was often the reaction of those who saw the M.W. Harris Ranch for the first time. A sense of pride swelled in his chest. Though the ranch didn't belong to him, he was a part of the reason that it was the way it was, and that made him feel almost equal to the man who held the deed to it. "Welcome home," he said, still grinning. Rebecca turned to him with a smile. "Thank you for bringing me here. Thank you for being willing to come. Everyone's so excited to meet ya," Thomas added as they passed under the arch and headed toward the main house. "Everyone?" "Yes. My boss, Marshall, he's right up there, and that's his wife, Grace, right next to him. That's their son, Elijah." "This isn't your land?" Thomas laughed. "Why, no. I work the land, but it ain't mine." He turned to Rebecca, whose eyes had shifted away from him. "I thought from your letters," she continued. "Oh no. That was just me praising this place and telling ya about my plans. I haven't got any land of my own yet, but I'm workin' on it." Every time Thomas spoke about his dreams, he felt this feeling swell in his chest. It wasn't something he could describe, but the nearest thing to it was surety. It may have seemed just idle talk for the moment, but he knew he was going to get his own homestead and start his own herd. He didn't want as large a place as Marshall's. A few good acres employing a handful of men was good enough for him. It would more than support himself and his family, whenever they had one. A man wasn't a man until he had something to call his own, and now that Rebecca had agreed to marry him, it was even more incentive to get his plan underway. 10 years of savings were sitting in the Lawton City Bank, and soon there would be enough to start building his dreams with Rebecca. "Welcome back, Thomas," Marshall called as the wagon stopped in front of him. "I brought someone real special," Thomas replied, jumping down from the wagon and securing the horses immediately, so he could help Rebecca down. He took her hand and led her to where his employers stood waiting. "Marshall Harris. Grace Harris. Little Elijah," he introduced. "This is my fiancée, Miss Rebecca Davis." "We're so happy to finally meet you," Grace offered in greeting, bouncing her little boy on her hip as she extended a hand. "That makes 2 of us," Marshall said with a smile, moving to take Rebecca's hand once his wife had released it. "It's a pleasure," Rebecca replied. Thomas smiled. "You both need to join us for dinner tonight," Grace invited. "It's Rebecca's first day here, and I've prepared something special to welcome her." "Grace, you shouldn't have, with the baby and all," Thomas protested. "But I'm sure all the hands will love it." He turned to Rebecca, putting a friendly arm around her shoulders. "Grace here is about the best cook I've ever known." Thomas's gaze fell on Rebecca as he spoke, and he was struck by the way her large eyes looked up at him in surprise. Those green eyes shone so brightly, they were like gems. It took him a minute to realize the informality of his actions by looping her in his arm. Rebecca may have been his fiancée, but this was still their first meeting. "I'm sorry," he muttered, dropping his arm. "It's all right," she replied, somewhat timidly. "I best show Rebecca around before dinner," he suggested, stuffing both hands into his pockets, embarrassed by his actions. "I'll take her suitcase to her room," Marshall offered, hoisting the single suitcase from the back of the wagon. "I'm not staying with Thomas." 3 pairs of eyes looked to one another. Thomas shuffled his feet. "Not yet. The ceremony won't be right away." Once we're married, you will, of course. Until then, you'll be stayin' in the main house with Marshall and the family. He's offered ya a nice room to call your own until all the arrangements are made with the preacher. That hasn't been done yet? Well, I wanted to, but the preacher's been out of town. He won't be back for a few days. We're just going to have to wait. Why don't I show you where I bunk? He offered quickly, desperate to end the awkward silence. Long silences made always Thomas nervous, and he tried to avoid them wherever possible. Today wasn't going to be that day, however. Rebecca didn't say a word on the entire ride to his cabin. He tried to get her excited about everything there was on the ranch, but she said very little if anything at all. You ain't sayin' much, he commented, once he'd show her the majority of his cabin, the only place he skipped being his bedroom. Thomas was very proud of the home he'd built himself, but for some reason when he'd told Rebecca that fact, her face seemed to fall even further. I'm sorry. I guess the change has me a bit bewildered. I'll be fine, she offered in explanation. You're probably just hungry and tired, Thomas replied. He was still trying his best to dismiss the disturbed feeling he was having, one that told him his fiancée was disappointed in what she'd found, and one that told him that what he was so proud of didn't impress her. Maybe, she answered. Then let's get back to the house. Everyone must already be round the table waiting for us. Chapter 5. What had she gotten herself into? The sun was nowhere near rising, and Rebecca was already awake, her hands cradling her head, as she thought of everything that had transpired the day before. She'd arrived in Lawton City, met Thomas, who was more handsome than she'd imagined, and she'd been brought to his home, only it wasn't his home, it was his employer's. And then, to top it off, she'd learned that she was expected to become one of the workers on the ranch, too. This wasn't what she'd come for. Rebecca had come to this place with the idea that she'd marry, have her own home to care for, and build a life together with Thomas. Only he had none of the things she'd thought he had. He'd arranged for to be home help for his employers, and hadn't even bothered to mention it. She'd found out when Grace had talked about it. Rebecca was used to caring for her family, but they were her family. Looking after and cleaning up behind people who weren't family wasn't something she'd ever considered doing. Now, it was expected. She didn't mind helping Grace. Seeing what the other woman was dealing with, another set of hands was a necessity more than a luxury. Rebecca wouldn't have minded if she'd been able to offer her help. It was the expectation that she didn't like. No one had asked her. Everyone just told her what was to be. Thomas's silence on the matter left her unsettled. There seemed to be a lot that he'd failed to mention. There ain't nothin' you can do about it now, she said resignedly. Just get on with it. Rebecca had decided that she might as well rise early, since she wasn't sleeping. She spent a good hour getting acquainted with everything in the kitchen by candlelight. By the time everyone was up, she had a meal on the table. Rebecca hoped it would be a big help to Grace. Young Elijah had spent much of the night fussing, it seemed. The sound of shuffling during the darkness had brought Rebecca from her bed to investigate. Grace had been walking the baby up and down singing a lullaby Rebecca had never heard. The other woman had to be exhausted, and if Rebecca was expected to help out, that next morning was the perfect time to start. The table was laden with everything Rebecca could find to offer. There were plenty of hungry men on the ranch, and no small amount of victuals would do for such hard-working men. Rebecca had to admit it felt good hearing their responses as they filed out, their bellies full and ready for a long day. She'd never cooked for so many before, nor heard such genuine praise. It felt nice being useful, appreciated. Rebecca? Yes, Thomas. May I speak with you outside? She looked at the table of dirty dishes. She couldn't just leave them, after all, she had prepared the meal. You go on, Rebecca. I can handle it here, Grace offered, with a small, encouraging smile. Thomas didn't wait for a reply. Much to her surprise, he took her by the hand and led her out the door. It wasn't until they were outside that she realized how nervous he seemed to be. The moment they'd reached the porch, he began to pace. Thomas? I just want to say that I'm sorry. His apology came as a surprise, but Rebecca held her tongue despite the urge to respond. She wanted to let him complete whatever it was he was hankering to say. I realized that there was some misunderstanding between us. You thought this place was mine, and it's not. I know that was a big disappointment, he continued, barely looking at her as he stalked back and forth. It was dizzying. Finally he stopped, and his eyes fixed on hers. Everything I wrote you about is true. I want all them things. I want our own homestead, with our house and a herd of our own. I want children, Anne, and to build something special. I know it might not seem that way now, but I know in my heart it's going to be real someday. You just have to hold on with me. Believe in me. Did she believe in him? She had when she'd read his letters, but now, seeing where he was and how far his dreams were from reality, she wasn't so sure. Her daddy had harbored such dreams, too, but eventually gambling took their place and their circumstances never changed. She didn't want that for her life. She wanted more than empty dreams. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. The words flew into her mind almost instantly from the source she'd referred to much of her life. Her own dreams had seemed too big, even foolish, but she'd believed in them. She had believed God had more for her than what she had. She just wasn't sure that where he wanted her to be was where she now stood. Had she acted in desperation and not in wisdom? Had she made a mistake? She didn't realize how long she'd been silent, but the look on Thomas's face was evidence enough that her level of faith in him had been guessed. She tried to think of something to soothe the pain in his eyes, but there was nothing. She could only imagine how he felt as a man with a woman who couldn't say she trusted him to look after her future, especially when that woman's only reason for being there was to be his wife. She felt awful. Thomas. I better be on my way. I got lots to do round here, and the day don't wait for no man, he stated, giving her a polite nod and striding off the porch. He didn't look back, and Rebecca found herself staring after him. She'd hurt his pride, and if there was anything she knew about men, which admittedly wasn't much, it was that their pride was a sensitive thing, easily offended and not so easily mended. Lord, what am I doing? She whispered. If you wait, he'll tell you, Grace's voice interrupted her, and Rebecca turned with a start. She looked at the other woman who was giving her a sympathetic smile. Did you hear all that? No, but I heard when Thomas stomped off. He's got a way of walking that lets you know when things aren't quite right. You seem to know him real well. I do. It took some time, but he's like family to me, and you will be too, if you decide to stay. Rebecca was puzzled. How did this woman, who didn't know her, seem to know what she'd been thinking? Why don't you come inside and have a chat with me? I think I may be able to help you with some of those concerns. Chapter 6. The talk with Grace had done much to assail Rebecca's fears. The kind woman had shared her own misgivings and doubts from when she first arrived on the ranch. She assured Rebecca that feeling out of place and uneasy was normal, even to be expected. She took great care in talking about Thomas's good character and kind nature. All of her reassurances were a great comfort to Rebecca, but they hadn't helped her find a way to make amends with Thomas. After their awkward conversation, he was cordial and spoke to her whenever he was near, but his manner had changed. His enthusiasm was gone. Rebecca was determined to find some way to bring it back, to show him that she could believe in him and his dreams. She felt hope now and possibility. She wanted to convey to him that though things weren't as she'd expected, she could work with him to make his dreams a reality. Thomas was really quiet this afternoon, Rebecca shared with Grace. She was doing some mending while Grace looked over household bills with Elijah teetering on her knee. He's distracted, Grace replied with a small yelp of pain, as her son yanked a handful of her hair. Give Thomas some time, and he'll be fussing all over you again. Land sake, Elijah. Don't yank on my hair. That hurts Mommy. Rebecca laughed quietly. Spending time with Grace was refreshing. They came from different worlds, yet she found she could relate to Grace, and never once did she feel inferior to her, quite unlike her experiences with her own family. Just let me finish up here and get Elijah down for his nap. Then I'll help you with dinner, Grace offered. It's fine. I can do it on my own. Nonsense. You're supposed to help me, not take over for me. I can help you cook. Twice the hands make half the time. Very well then, Rebecca said with a smile. I'll get started on it soon as I finish up here. The two women fell into companionable silence, each carrying out the tasks before them. Rebecca was just finishing up the last shirt, and was about to put the sewing away, when the noise of a wagon and a scraping on the porch drew both women's attentions. There was a murmur of voices too low for recognition, and they stared at the door anxiously, until it finally opened. You two look busy, Marshall commented as he stepped inside. He was smiling, but there was something not quite right about it. Rebecca realized what it was. The smile didn't reach his eyes as they settled on her. Afternoon, Thomas spoke from behind him. He wasn't alone, however. Another man seemed to be lingering on the porch, but Rebecca couldn't quite make out who he was from where she sat. You're back early, Grace stated, getting to her feet to greet her husband. We ran into someone in town and thought it best to bring him right away, he said softly, his eyes once again turning in Rebecca's direction. A knot formed in her stomach as she saw that Thomas was giving her an identical stare. Who is it? Grace asked, peering around Marshall's shoulder. The name is Owen Tucker, Mrs. Harris. I came all the way from Georgia to find Rebecca. Rebecca's ears didn't seem to be working right. She was seeing his lips move, but the sound she heard was all wrong, distant and distorted. He couldn't be there. He shouldn't be there. How had he found her? And more importantly, why had he come? Panic momentarily gripped her throat as Owen's black eyes set on her with a sickeningly sweet smile she knew to be false. Instantly, she was on her feet. Mr. Tucker. Mr. Tucker? Is that any way to greet someone you know so well? He bellowed. Everyone stared at her. She could feel the palms of her hands grow clammy. She wiped them on the skirt of her dress. How could she explain this? She looked at Thomas, whose face was unnaturally still. What are you doing here? She asked, turning to stack the clothes in a pile. I came for you. She turned sharply. Fermi? Yes. Your parents were quite concerned when you disappeared like that. They sent me to find you, and given the understanding between our families, I was bound to assist them. She felt ill. Owen laughed. I'm sorry. Please forgive me for being so rude, airing personal business like this. Would you all mind if I took Rebecca for a few minutes? Everyone continued gawking at him. We won't be long, he insisted. Rebecca was compelled to move, even though she didn't want to. If Owen stayed longer, he might reveal something she didn't want known, namely, the fact that her parents had arranged her marriage to him. She also couldn't let him think that such an agreement still stood. She wasn't marrying Owen Tucker now, or ever. I'll meet you outside, Mr. Tucker. Just let me put the sewing away. Don't take long. I'll be outside. Owen gave a small nod to the others. Pleasure to meet you fine people, he added, before stepping out the way he'd come. Rebecca could feel the eyes watching her every movement, but she lacked the courage to face them just yet. Instead, she kept her gaze to the floor and mumbled an apology to Grace, assuring her she'd be back soon to help with dinner. She couldn't even look in Thomas's direction. Owen kept calm while they were still within earshot of the house, but the moment he deemed he'd go unheard, he was hissing in Rebecca's ear. How dare you embarrass me, he snapped, grabbing her firmly by the arm and spinning her toward him. A little snipe like you from a nobody family runs away from my proposal? You should be thanking me that I'd even condescend to look past your squalor to your qualities. I offered you a fine home and a position in society, at my side, and you run away? His face burned red and his look frightened Rebecca as she strained and failed to release herself from his grasp. Finally, she found her tongue. I appreciate your interest, Mr. Tucker, and that my father came to some terms with ya, but I never said I'd marry ya. I don't want to. She stood erect, or as best she could. I won't. You won't? His words were so caustic they sent a shiver up her spine. Believe me, Rebecca, I have shown you and your family charity, but I will not be made a fool of. He squeezed her arm harder. You will be my wife. I will have return on my investment, be it through you or your parents. I'll get what I want. He shoved her away and stalked back to the front of the house, leaving Rebecca shivering. She'd never been threatened before. She didn't dare think of what lengths a man like Owen would go to in order to get what he wanted. He had position in the bank and could make things difficult for her father if he chose to. On the other hand, what would he do to her if she did as he asked? What would her life be like? And was he leaving? Where was he going? She knew full well it wasn't over. She put her arms around herself, trying to keep from shaking. She heard the sound of horses and saw a wagon pull away with a finely dressed man sitting beside the driver. He was gone, but the fear he'd brought with him remained. Rebecca wasn't sure how long she stood fixed to the spot, but suddenly there was a voice, saying her name. Thomas, she asked vaguely. You best come inside. I think there's some things we need to talk about. Chapter 7. Their conversation didn't go well. Rebecca did the best she could to appease Thomas's questions without revealing the whole truth about Owen Tucker. She hated being secretive, but she feared his reaction. Wouldn't the full truth destroy their tenuous relationship? In truth, Rebecca didn't know what to do. As Thomas walked away in disgust, Rebecca felt even more confused. She wasn't sure what Thomas thought of her. Or even if he cared for her at all anymore. Nothing was certain. Her heart pained her as she went about her chores that evening. She kept to herself, ignoring the questioning gazes from everyone at the ranch. Why in the world did the odious Owen have to show up there anyway? How could he possibly still want her? She knew that wasn't the issue. He didn't want her. All Owen cared about were appearances. And him dragging her back to Georgia would somehow, at least in his mind, vindicate him. As she finished the dishes, she sighed heavily. Would nothing ever turn out? Would she and Thomas never get the new life they both desired? Relax, Thomas. We don't have all the facts yet, Marshall stated calmly, but Thomas knew Marshall well enough to know that he was as flustered by the presence of Owen Tucker as he was. He shoved a hand through his hair. Who is he, Marshall? He spoke to Rebecca real friendly-like, and I can't seem to get any answers. She won't tell me hardly a thing. He began pacing the floor. But she didn't speak to him very friendly, Grace pointed out, but it did nothing to quell Thomas's agitation. What could he have said to her outside like that? We can't jump to conclusions. We have to give Rebecca a chance to explain, Grace continued. She doesn't seem to want to explain anything. It was the next day in the salon after dinner, and Thomas hadn't been able to sit for a second, not even after Grace asked him to several times. Thoughts tormented him, but worse yet, was not knowing the answer to his questions. How well did Tucker know Rebecca's family? What kind of understanding was there between them? Why did Tucker make it seem as if she'd run away? And why try to find her if she had? Didn't her parents know about their marriage? Hadn't they approved of it? Things weren't making sense, and Thomas hated it when things didn't make sense. He waited for Rebecca to finish cleaning the kitchen and to join them in the salon. But she didn't come. Finally, unable to wait any longer, he strode into the kitchen, but it was empty. He barreled outside looking for her. When he found her, the look on her face made his stomach drop. Whatever had transpired since her meeting with Owen had clearly taken a toll. Rebecca looked nauseous, and she was staring at nothing at all. She even appeared to be trembling. When he spoke, she didn't seem to recognize him, but despite her confused state, Thomas wasn't to be shaken. He needed answers. She hadn't told him much the day before, but he wasn't going to give up this time. He beckoned her inside the salon where both Grace and Marshall still were. Thomas and Rebecca sat down, although far apart from each other. Silence occupied every space in the room. None of the four seemed to want to be the first to speak, but Thomas was too anxious to be silent anymore. What's going on, Rebecca? And this time, don't leave anything out. We all know something's happened. He ground his hands together to hold in his temper. We want to help if we can, but you have to tell us the truth," Marshall tried to soothe the situation. Rebecca had the look of a cornered animal, but she opened her mouth to speak. Thomas wasn't as prepared to hear the truth as he thought. Listening as Rebecca finally explained her plight was harder to deal with than he'd imagined. When she finished her story, he slumped back in his chair. "So your parents were forcing you to marry him," he said, unable to believe that her parents would insist that she marry someone she didn't want, especially someone like Owen Tucker. But people had their reasons, even if he didn't always understand them. Still, her parents' attempt to gain what they could by the only means available to them wasn't one Thomas could abide by. Not when the result would mean misery for Rebecca. "Marshall, I think we should leave these two alone," Grace suggested, rising to her feet and taking her husband's hand. "'Scuse us." Marshall nodded his head and followed his wife, who turned and looked over her shoulder to give Thomas a gentle smile. Thomas's eyes turned slowly to his bride-to-be, who, as he now knew, was also the fiancée of another man. But Rebecca's words had emboldened him, and after a moment of hesitation, he crossed the room and knelt before her, taking her hands gently in his. What should he say? Her story was so unexpected. He'd hoped love would grow between them, but he wasn't marrying just for a feeling. He was marrying the person who matched his spirit. Love could be fleeting and sometimes false, but when two people's spirits met, it was something that could last. Rebecca's letters had made him believe in such things, and the moment he had seen her, it had been confirmed. Something deep inside had spoken to him and said, "Yes, she's the one." Her lack of faith in him had been hard to bear. He thought she'd just trust in him, but it seemed she expected something more. "Did you mean it?" he asked, as he forced his eyes from their joined hands and met her gaze. "You don't want him?" Rebecca sat silent for a moment, then a smile appeared as she nodded. "I meant it. You're not joshing me, right?" "No, Thomas. I meant what I said." He searched her eyes for deception and found none. She visibly swallowed. Well, I want us to try. You and me. I want us to have a new beginning together. I've been confused. I know that. I haven't been easy since coming here. But I'm becoming fond of ya, Thomas. Truly fond. I hope y'all believe me." The words made Thomas's stomach flip, and his heart fill with hope. Such was his relief that he began to chuckle. Her eyes widened. "What is it? What's so funny?" "Nothin'. I'm happy is all," he confessed. "I wanted a wife who'd love me, but I didn't think it would be possible. But now, you're tellin' me that you're fond of me. You've given me hope, Rebecca. I thought you'd have to know me better." He hesitated, and then decided that her confession deserved one of his own. "I fell for ya from that second letter." He squeezed her hands gently but firmly. "Rebecca Davis, you came here to be my wife, and I ain't lettin' no man take what's mine." He fixed his eyes on her face, willing her to know his words were true. "Ain't no man to marry ya but me. The preacher's back today. Tomorrow, Marshall and I'll take you and Grace to town to see about wedding clothes and about getting everything squared away." Rebecca's face lit up. "You mean it?" "I wouldn't lie to ya. I've prayed fair ya since I met ya." "I prayed fair you, too." She was grinning like a schoolgirl. "What God says is mine, no man shall take from me. I don't care who Owen Tucker is, what he does, or what he can buy. He couldn't buy you. He sure can't buy me neither, and no matter what he thinks he's doin' here, he ain't leavin' with ya. Promise?" The tears in her eyes did something to him, and before he knew it he was on his feet and pulling her up to him. "I promise," he stated as he encircled her with his arms and buried his chin in her hair. "I'll protect ya, Rebecca, with my life if I have to, but I'll protect ya." Chapter 8. Thomas hadn't slept a wink. Since leaving Rebecca the night before, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was going to happen. Something bad. Breakfast was delicious. Grace was amazing in the kitchen, but Rebecca was even better, something he hadn't thought possible. He really was a lucky man. He watched Rebecca from across the table, and she watched him, their eyes meeting over ham and fresh biscuits as they talked with the other ranch hands. Her spirits seemed bright, and he was glad for it. He didn't want her living with a cloud over her head. Once they were married, Owen Tucker would have no reason to stay in town, and they could begin the life they'd written to each other about. The men finished their meal quickly, but Thomas found himself drawing it out, wanting more time to sit across from Rebecca. Despite the fact that today wasn't going to be a day for work, but one for planning, he found that something in him had changed, and with it the way he'd seen everything before. Work was important, the wedding ceremony was important, but none of that was more important than being there for the woman who had sneaked in and claimed his heart. In the wagon, Marshall sat beside Grace and Elijah, while Thomas sat beside Rebecca. He held her hand as they bounced along the road, rubbing the back of her gloved knuckles with the pad of his thumb. They didn't say much, but Thomas had never spent a more pleasant trip. Lawton City was covered in white. Winter snow had lingered long past its time, and everything still smelt and felt of Christmas. The road was a mess from the melting snowfall, and both he and Marshall had gotten their boots thoroughly coated while lifting Grace and Rebecca safely onto the stoop of the closest store. "So how are we going about this?" Thomas questioned, once they were all out of the street. Rebecca was standing to his right and Grace to his left, with Elijah bundled up to his ears. "I think we should escort the ladies to Mrs. Wilson's to get Rebecca fixed up with a dress." Marshall gave Thomas a pointed look. "You and I can then go see the preacher." "I think we should go see Sheriff Hode," Thomas added. "I agree with ya. If this man Tucker is as Rebecca describes, he's bound to be up to no good now that she's refused him," Marshall answered. "I know he's still in the area. I've asked around." Thomas's hand instinctively reached out and pulled Rebecca closer. "Then let's get going. I think Hode should know about him right away." A few minutes later, Thomas stood by Rebecca at the door of the seamstress shop. There was such a clutter in the place. Fabrics of all colors, and buttons of all shapes were laid out on tables. The measuring took place in the back, while the storefront held all there was for the making of clothing. Thomas found it dizzying that so many different types of fabric could exist, and he knew that Mrs. Wilson was hardly a large supplier. How did women find interest in such things? "You goin' to be all right here by yourselves?" "Thomas," Grace mused, "go on, now. We'll be just fine. Go about your business. I'll be with Rebecca. Don't worry about her." Grace's assurances were welcomed, but that same sick feeling in Thomas's stomach had him in knots. There was something off, but he couldn't figure out what. "All right," he agreed, backing out of the store. Marshall was already stationed on the porch surveying the street with eagle-like intent. "You feelin' it, too?" Thomas questioned, as he went to stand beside him. "That something ain't right?" Marshall nodded. "Let's go see Hode." Sheriff Hode agreed that Tucker's manner toward Rebecca was a threat, even if he hadn't outright stated he intended harm. Still, his hands were tied besides giving the man an official warning to stay clear of Rebecca and everyone else associated with the ranch. Hode's assurances were good to hear but did nothing to dissipate that feeling deep in Thomas's gut. They had moved on from the sheriff's office and down to the church to speak with the preacher. Thomas wanted everything tidied up to make Rebecca his wife as soon as possible. Until Tucker was out of town and his ring was on Rebecca's finger, he wouldn't be at ease. "Well, I never thought I'd see the day," Preacher Taylor declared, slapping his knee to punctuate his point. "Lil, Thomas Beckett wants to marry." "A shock, I know." Thomas chuckled. "But my mind's made up, and the lady's here to marry me." "Then I have nothing else to do but see that you get hitched," Taylor replied. "First though, I need to meet the lady." "Where is she?" "She's with Grace down at Mrs. Wilson's gettin' fitted up fair her weddin' clothes. You best have her come by here before y'all leave town. I'm keen to see what kind of lady was able to snag the heart of our Thomas." Thomas raked his hand through his hair. Preacher Taylor had known him since he'd first seen the light of day. He'd baptized him, tanned his hide when he needed it, and counseled him when he needed that, too. Now the man who had been the closest things to his father was going to be marrying him. "Your daddy would have been real proud of ya." Thomas's eyes met the older man's. He smiled. Thank ya. I guess I was wonderin' if he'd be happy to see where I'm at. Marshall clapped a hand on his shoulder. We all are, Thomas. Every last one of us. The weight that lifted from his shoulders at their words made him feel like he could take on the world. He hadn't even realized he'd been carrying the burden of that concern until they'd spoken to it. He grinned. It was funny how God had a way of helping you, even with things you didn't even know were troubling you. Thomas's quiet thoughts weren't to last long, however. Minutes later, their peaceful exchange was shattered by the sound of pounding shoes and panting gasps. She's gone. Grace cried. I can't find her anywhere. Every nerve in Thomas's body came to life as he sprang into action. He raced from the church, not even waiting to hear more from Grace. Marshall could question her on what had happened. He needed to find Rebecca. Thomas skidded to a stop outside Mrs. Wilson's shop before he burst in unceremoniously. Rebecca, he called repeatedly, rushing between the tables to the back room. She ain't here, Thomas. Mrs. Harris already looked for her. Mrs. Wilson's words fell on deaf ears as Thomas went through the back room. A small door in the corner caught his eye. What's this? It leads to the back. It's locked. Thomas turned the handle, and the door swung open. He turned to Mrs. Wilson, who looked as shocked as he did. How'd that get open? Her words were a lingering sound behind him as Thomas raced out the door and down the short passageway that led to a back road. It was the perfect place to conceal someone who had been snatched away. Rebecca, he yelled into the empty street, his eyes darting in all directions. There were faint wagon marks in the snow. Someone had waited here. Someone had taken Rebecca, and there was only one person who'd have any reason to do it. Tucker. Thomas's fingers curled into his palms as his nostrils flared. Lord, let me find her safe. I won't hurt him, just please let me find her. Chapter 9. The barn was cold and smelled old. It was clear that whoever had used it last was long gone. There wasn't an animal to be seen or any remnant of what had been housed there. How had Owen found the place? Rebecca was seated on a small bale of hay, the last of a supply long forgotten. The night had crept in quickly, and a chill had come with it. She was thankful for her coat and gloves, but still the air nipped at her nose and cheeks, her breath exhaling in a cloud. I apologize for the less than sanitary surroundings, a voice spoke from the darkness, a single flicker of light flaming up, before Owen came into view. Rebecca fixed her eyes on him but said nothing. He'd been trying to get her to talk to him ever since his goons had brought her there. She refused to give him the satisfaction. Still not speaking to me, huh? He stood before her and reached out a hand to lift her chin. She grimaced. I do apologize for that, Owen commented, referring to the bruised cheek she'd been given by one of his thugs. I so abhor violence, but my men tell me you refused to come quietly, and they needed to take action to keep from being discovered. He sighed. You know things would be easier if you just did what I asked. My offer has been more than handsome, especially for one such as yourself. Why did he want her? He kept referring to her as if she were vermin or something of the like. She didn't live in squalor or rummage for food. Perhaps she didn't have as much as others, but she did have self-respect. She gritted her teeth. Your men are animals, and you're no better. At last, she speaks, Owen practically sang. Much better than silence. You're not gonna get away with this. Thomas will find me and make you sorry, she retorted angrily. I highly doubt that. Your rancher boy has no idea where we are, and I highly doubt he'll find us either, at least not before we board the train. Train? Her insides went cold. Yes. You don't think I'm planning on staying here, do you? My life is in Georgia, and so is yours. We'll be traveling first thing in the morning. I've booked our passage as Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, and when we get back, I've made all the arrangements for a quick and suitable wedding. You don't even like me. Why are you insisting I marry you? There's lots of girls back home who'd be happy to be your wife. Why not leave me in peace? He stooped before her, aiming the light up to her face, allowing her to see his beady little eyes. Because no one rejects me, you hear? No one. Are you that stupid? Everyone back home is laughing at me, but not for much longer. When they see you with me, they'll know the truth. Owen Tucker gets what he wants, and no one, he leaned closer, no one makes a fool of me. You can tell everyone that you was the one who got rid of me. His eyes narrowed. You're stupider than I thought. No one's going to know exactly what happened here. Do you understand that? You will never mention this incident. Ever. Or I will be forced to become unpleasant. The deliberate way he spoke sent a shiver up her spine. Sleep well, he said with a grin. I'll be up early to wake you. Rebecca couldn't bring herself to speak. She watched Owen's back until he and the light disappeared. Once he was gone, the tears she'd been holding behind her anger broke free. This couldn't be happening. She didn't want this. She didn't want Georgia and Owen Tucker. She wanted Nebraska and Thomas Beckett, her Thomas. God, she whispered, help. Let him find me, Lord. Don't let this happen. Please. I put my trust in you. Deliver me from mine enemy. Morning came too quickly. Rebecca felt as if she'd only closed her eyes for a moment, before Owen and his thugs were before her again, pulling her up from where she'd slept and forcing her to her feet. Is everything ready? Owen questioned one of them. Just like you asked, boss. We checked you out of your hotel yesterday. As far as anyone's concerned, you already left town, the tall one replied through his missing teeth. Good, Owen said. His eyes settled on her face. Get her in the wagon. We have a train to catch. Rebecca felt tired and sore, but she didn't go without a struggle. She dug her heels into the dirt, and did what she could to try to keep away from their grasping hands, but it was no use. There was nowhere for her to go, and soon they had her by the arms, half dragging her as they forced her to the waiting wagon. She wanted to scream as they led her to the train. Wherever they'd been was somewhere between Lawton City and Rolling Creek, where she'd first arrived. Panic filled her heart as the men forced her onto the train with something sharp poking into her back. It had come with a stern warning to keep her tongue behind her teeth, unless she wanted to be badly hurt. Owen certainly had a way of choosing his henchmen. She was forced up to a waiting railway car and hurried through the door. She had barely stepped inside when a hand grabbed her and tossed her onto one of the cushioned seats. She heard the sound of scuffling erupt behind her and from the corridor outside. She turned, and her heart leapt at the sight before her. Thomas. He didn't look at her. His entire focus was on the man before him and the blade in his hand, as it slashed at him in the close quarters. Rebecca tried to make herself as small as possible as the men fought, pushing each other from one corner of the space to the other, growls of anger erupting from Thomas as curses issued from his foe. She could barely see beyond them, but from the ruckus, it would seem that the rest of Thomas's party had met with similar resistance. Crashing sounds and groans filled the air, including a sharp blow that Rebecca imagined to be a fist on a face. There were faint screams of alarmed women, but the strain of the men's voice overshadowed them. She watched in horror as Owen seemed to be getting the best of Thomas. She searched wildly for something she could use as a weapon. There was nothing. She jumped up, determined to help when Thomas landed a blow on Owen's neck. Owen crumpled to the floor before her. Rebecca screamed, and the next moment she was pulled into a fervent embrace. Thomas's breath came quick and hot in her ear as he clutched her to himself. Thank God, he repeated over and over, pushing her back so he could inspect her, his hands checking her arms while his eyes surveyed her body. His hands finally moved to her face and the mark which had been left there. Animals, he seethed. Rebecca couldn't feel anger for what had been done to her, not at that moment. The boulder of fear which had pressed upon her chest was lifted, and thankful tears began to flow. I was so frightened. I thought I'd have to go back with him. I told ya, Thomas muttered, his hands gently cupping her face to keep her eyes on him, I wouldn't let anyone take you away from me. He kissed her forehead. I keep my word, he said against her skin, as once again he pulled her close. Sheriff Hoad appeared in the door a few seconds later. Everything all right in here? We're fine, Sheriff, Thomas replied. He looked to where the Owen lay in a heap. My men'll take care of him. We got all the rest of them, Holt explained. Rebecca shivered, and Thomas pulled her closer. If it's all right with ya, Sheriff, I'd like to take Rebecca home. Fine by me. They were caught red-handed, don't need much from her right now. I'll come by the ranch later to get all the details. Thomas hugged her gently before drawing back, once again looking her over. You're bleedin', she stated, noticing the cut that had split his shirt across his chest. Blood seeped through the edges of the tear. It's nothin'. Let's get you home. The word echoed in her head. Home. Chapter 10. The door slammed as Thomas kicked it open with his foot, causing a laugh to rise up from somewhere deep within Rebecca's belly. He had insisted on carrying her over the threshold, even though the rain was falling and neither of them had anything to cover themselves. Damp hair clung to the skin on her neck, and her beautiful gown was soaked through, but she didn't care. Why would she? The dress had done its work at the wedding, but the man in whose arms she now rested would be with her for the rest of her life. You'd think the Lord would have spared the rain for such a day, Thomas mused, stepping into the living room of the log cabin and shutting the door as brusquely as it had been opened. Showers of blessing, Rebecca replied, as her husband finally set her upon the floor. The room, which had once held disappointment, now overflowed with possibility. Her entire life held more possibility, now that Owen Tucker was out of it. I'm gonna miss this little place, Thomas commented, handing Rebecca a cloth as he began to dry his hair. It's going to take a while to get the new homestead up and runnin', but I'll start right on it soon as the weather warms up and the ground's a bit softer for digging. She watched him with rapt attention as he planned their way forward. His words held complete certainty, now that they had 10 acres of land for themselves. I still can't believe Marshall and Grace gave us such a gift, she commented, taking the rough fabric and rubbing it through her hair. I can. Marshall's always looked out for me like a brother. He hung his head, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. I just never dreamed fair so much. I thought maybe 1 or 2 acres, but not 10. His eyes lifted and met hers. 10 acres, Rebecca. 10 acres of our own. One moment he was across the room, and the next he was before her, his hands resting gently on her upper arms. Now I can keep all the promises I made to ya. Now I can be the man you wanted me to be. Thomas, Rebecca said gently, raising her hand to touch the slight bristle along his jaw. Ya already are. Before I left Georgia I knew it, and everything I seen in ya since has proven that I wasn't wrong. God made ya fair me. I'm sorry it took me a bit of adjusting to realize it. Emotion overwhelmed her. Everything that had transpired in the past few days came in like a flood. Being captured by Owen, her rescue and the ensuing matters with the sheriff and the hasty trial, and of course, the wedding. If you hadn't come fair me that day, she said shakily, as she moved to rest her head upon his chest. I don't want to know where I'd be right now. You just need to forget about that. You're here now, with me. His arms wrapped around her like a warm blanket, welcoming her home after the sting of a cold day. He smelled different, of some kind of scent she'd never smelled before. It invaded her senses in the most pleasant of ways, all wood and spice. "You smell nice." Was a gift from Grace. She said a man oughta have something nice to splash on fair his weddin' day. Grace is a very wise woman, Rebecca mused, lifting her chin to see his face. It was amazing how handsome he was to her now, even more so than when she'd arrived. The angle of his jaw, the softness of his eyes, his sandy brown hair, all gave an air of boyishness to him, but Thomas was no boy. Their eyes lingered on one another, the silence of the room growing heavy around them, as something stirred in her stomach and chest. The lump in Thomas's throat bobbed up and down. He seemed to feel it, too. "We best be gettin' ya out of them clothes," he said suddenly, and Rebecca felt her love rise straight up through her heart and into her face. "You're soaked through, and I don't want you catchin' cold," he explained, his eyes looking away from her momentarily. Rebecca didn't reply. Her eyes stayed on him, and eventually his eyes returned to hers. "You ain't sayin' nothin', Dot." "Ain't nothin' to say," she whispered. Again the lump in his throat moved up and down, and then he stepped toward her, eliminating the space that had once been. "You're the most precious thing I've ever seen in my life." His words made her heart race. "Just like you are to me," she murmured, looking up at him through thick lashes. "Why, Mrs. Beckett, are you flirtin' with me?" "Maybe I am, Mr. Beckett," she said, winding her arms around his neck. "Am I doing it right?" Thomas pulled her closer. "I say ya are." A moment later their lips met, and Rebecca was sure there'd never been a kiss like it in all of Nebraska. Every torment of her life and every hardship she'd prayed about seemed erased. Hope and love were manifested in that one kiss. Excitement and slight trepidation began to erupt like a geyser inside her as Thomas held her tighter, and their kiss deepened. "Rebecca," Thomas said heavily. "There's one more room I'd like to show ya if you're willin'. The only one ya ain't seen yet." Restraint burned in his eyes. It made Rebecca feel bashful and bold all at once. "I'm willin'," she replied. She followed Thomas as he led her by the hand, through the doors which would conceal the transition of her life from girl to wife. The door closed behind them, and Rebecca understood the beauty of becoming one. Later, she lay in Thomas's arms, and together, they dreamed and whispered of their future together. The end. Thank you for listening to this heartwarming story by Susannah Calloway. You can be assured that all her books are clean and wholesome. To find other romances by Susannah Calloway, as well as the other authors at Tika House Publishing, visit www.tikahousepublishing.com. Remember to hit like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next Susannah Calloway Western romance.